Well, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. And today it gives me great pleasure to introduce Paul Hayes, who is a friend and has also just finished writing a book called Spending Your Way to Wealth. And so today's presentation is going to be on the psychology of spending, investing, and passing this information on to your children and your grandchildren. Paul retired after a career in financial services, helping people, individuals, corporations, and municipalities to be informed and then to make better financial decisions. 20 years ago, he met a professor at the University of Washington and formed a collaborative relationship. The professor was the former director of the UW's clinical psychology department, and they have worked together doing presentations and even invented the word investorship along the way. Today, Paul is going to talk about his program of making your own financial decisions. We're all normal people and we all make mistakes. And so this is to try and enhance our knowledge, to help and to poke a little fun at ourselves. So hopefully Paul can, we'll gain a lot of information from Paul. I have read his book, and I have thought, and I have come to the conclusion it really did make me think. But there's one fun thing you should know about Paul. He has appeared in the Pacific Northwest Ballet's production of The Nutcracker as the drunken uncle. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I forgot my tutu today. One slight correction. I have never made this presentation to palaces. That word was municipalities that I helped advise over my career. But palaces are on my list of target audiences. Just a brief background on why I'm doing what I'm doing, what prompted me to write a book, and why am I talking about the psychology of spending, investing, and wealth. I stopped working in my mid-50s because I'd reached a point in my career where I no longer needed to work. And I had this abiding interest in how people make financial decisions. In college, I minored in psychology and marketing. I was the head teacher for the head of the psychology department at my university. Always had this fascination with why do we do what we do and what causes us to behave the way we do about anything. I went in the Air Force after college and flew, became a flight instructor. And as a course of becoming a flight instructor, I went through a rather intensive psychology of learning. It was put on by the Air Force to help people that were going to be training pilots, help them understand how they make decisions under stress. The person that I became most acquainted with was somebody by the name of Daniel Kahneman. I'm going to talk more about him later, but he was a professor of psychology at the Hebrew University in Tel Aviv. And he was focusing on helping pilots effectively or make better effective decisions. I came off active duty, went in the reserve, stayed there, retired, and served as a flight instructor on multi-engine airplanes for many years. And I followed Kahneman's policies as it related to cockpit psychology. And he immigrated to the United States many years ago, moved to California, where he became a psychologist at the University of California in Berkeley. And he brought with him, or he came with, a colleague from Tel Aviv University, Amos Tversky, another psychologist who became a full-time professor of psychology at Stanford. I'll talk a little more about those, but they had such a profound impact on me as a flight instructor. I became aware of what they were doing in the financial world and helping people understand financial decisions. So that's a little bit of background on me. As you look at the screen there, you'll see a psychology of spending, investing, and wealth. That's kind of what this is about, but I'd like to point to your attention to the fact that wealth is plural. And probably you've never seen wealth written in a plural form before because it's never been I've never found it written that way, but it's a very appropriate way to look at wealth because there are many forms of wealth, of which finance is one of them. But here's a few definitions that'll be helpful throughout the day. Wealth is an abundance of things of value, pure and simply. No mention of money. Spending is an exchange of one thing of value for something else of perceived greater value. Again, no mention of money. So today is going to be focused on money, but when we talk about wealth and spending, it's not limited to wealth. It's something, they're terms that are as applicable in other areas as they are in finance. But just to kind of get our brains limbered up a little bit here, let's just do this as an exercise. Start with a penny, double it every day for 31 days, 1 month. And how much you suppose you'll have at the end of 31 days? And I'll give everybody, 10 seconds to ponder that. Start with a penny, double it every day for 31 days. At the end of the month, how much money do you have? If you have a pencil handy, write it down. Nobody's going to see your answer, but it'll help you remind yourself of what you thought the answer might be. So just pick a number out of the air as what you think it would be at the end of 1 month. And I'm going to show you the answer. It's $21 million. Easily determined. All you need is 31 lines on a ledger page. You start with a penny at the top right, double it every day for 31 days, and you can see right there it's $21,474,000. That's huge, but it's so far outside of what most people imagine it to be. Why is that? Why does our brain not allow us to do something so simple? Or why don't we take the time to do something so simple to come up with an answer? Now, when I give this talk in other areas on board ship, I did this in Spain, and I had just gotten through reading Don Quixote, and so I was reminded of windmills. So I labeled my questions, and I asked people a few questions that I'll ask you, and I labeled them windmills. Question 1, for instance, is windmill number 1. Let's start with a bat and a ball that costs $1.10. Pretty straightforward, nothing complicated. These are designed really to show us how normal we are. So simple questions that everybody can come up with the answer. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. So the bat and the ball together are $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Well, it's simple, doesn't it? I mean, it jumps right out at you. It's logical. It's 10 cents. If the bat costs $1.10 and the bat costs $1 more than the ball must cost 10 cents. Raise your hand if you think it costs 10 cents, because 99% of the time when I ask these questions, that's the answer people give me. Mm-hmm. But it's wrong. It cannot cost 10 cents. It costs 5 cents. Well, why is 10 cents wrong? Well, if it costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1 more, doesn't that make the bat cost $1.10? And if you add $1.10 bat to a 10-cent ball, you have $1.20. But the question started off saying the two together cost $1.10. So the most common answer, the most instinctive answer, the answer almost all of us come up with. I struggled with this, trying to figure it out when I first saw it. But the answer is it can't be 10 cents. How do you come up with 5 cents? Well, if you're like me, I forgot algebra, so I just tried number. I knew it wasn't 10 cents anymore, so I just started in the middle. I said, well, what if it costs 5 cents? Well, that would make the bat cost $1.05. Oh, okay, and the $1.05 bat and a 5-cent ball, I'm at the answer, $1.10 for the two. But, why did I get that wrong? Okay, let's try another one. This is another very simple question where it's an obvious answer. Mary's father has 5 daughters. Their names are Nana, Nini, Nai, No. And what's the 5th daughter's name? Just look at it. Pretty obvious what the name has to be. It's got to be Nunu, doesn't it? No, it's not Nunu. It's Mary, not Nunu. Why is it Mary? Well, Mary has 4 sisters and her father has 5 daughters. So Mary has to be one of the other 4 sisters. So her name is obviously Mary. If we just took a little time to look at that and not be so inclined to just think we're smart enough to spot a trend. Because we all tend to do that. We all tend to see things as patterns, and we extend those patterns, and we conclude from those patterns what we think the answer is. Well, why do we do that? Real easy answer. We're normal. So I'm talking today to people that are absolutely normal, even though probably quite a few of you, if you're like most people, didn't get all the answers correct. Maybe your 21 million fell short of what the real, or was excessive, or in excess of what the real answer is. But why is that? Why is it that such normal people tend to make such obvious mistakes, but they're not obvious at the time we make them? And unless we have some mechanism in place to go back and check to see whether our immediate answer is correct, we just go on with our merry lives and we continue to make decision after decision. I've often wondered how many 10-cent balls there are floating around in the atmosphere, people grasping at answers that aren't right. Uh, Mark Twain was quoted with having said, "It isn't what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so." And boy, nothing could be more correct. That is such a profound point of view, but it is so contrary to our nature. And we're going to talk about nature today because this is psychology of decision making, and how we think is a form of behavior. And so jumping ahead, and this may seem a little fragmented, and it's not intended to be, but it's designed to point out some obvious things about us. Let's start with the rule of 72. Some of you have heard of it. Some of you may know it well. It's basically a rule of thumb to determine the length of time it takes for something to double. So for instance, if a growth rate is expected to be 10%, you divide 10 into 72, and it's going to take 7.2 years for that something to double. If a city had a population of 1 million and it was known to be growing at 7.2%, or at 10%, then in 7.2 years, the population would have gone from 1 million to 2 million. If the growth rate were 7.2%, same thing, same formula. It would take 10 years for something to double. So that's just kind of an easy rule of thumb that is something that's worth remembering, because every once in a while we have occasion to wonder, if something is going to double, what percentage increase is going to cause it to double and how long. Again, this may seem a little disjointed, but let's use a little financial history here in posing a question, and then let our mathematical wizardry help us get the answer. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, or the Dow as it's frequently called, is currently about 25,000. Actually, it's a little over that, but just to make the arithmetic simple, let's say it's 25,000. And in the past many decades, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, like the S&P 500 index, two broad measures of market performance, have averaged about 10% per year. That's with dividends included, but that's an average. There's years where the markets are up, there's years where the markets are down, but on average, the return from both of those major indices is about 10% a year. So that's a reasonable assumption based on past. There's no assurance it'll be in the future. Maybe it'll be higher than that in the future. Maybe it won't be that much, but let's assume for the purpose of this question that we use 10% as a number. The level of Dow. Somebody have a question? I heard something come up in the speaker. So right now, if I ask you the question, what will the level of the Dow be in 50 years? People try to make estimates on what the market's going to be in the future, but here's one: what will it be in 50 years? Again, just kind of close your eyes for a minute and just think of what you think it might be. Just what comes to mind. When I ask this in crowds, somebody will say, a couple 100,000. Somebody else, oh, no. I think it's going to be closer to, maybe 500,000. So, oh, no, God, it'd never be that high. It might be 130,000. That's the range of answers that you typically get. So if your thoughts are somewhere in that range, your thoughts are sort of along the lines of other people. Maybe you've got a random notion that it's going to be at 1 million. Who knows? But let's look at the arithmetic. If something doubles in 7 years, then it's going to double 7 times in 49 years, isn't it? Doubles in 7 years, in 49 years, it's going to double 7 times. Okay, that's a clue as to where the market's going to be in 50 years, because 49 and 50 are, for all practical purposes, one and the same. So if the Dow is currently at 25,000 and you multiply it by 7, that's going to have the Dow at 175,000. Okay. When I put this on a slide, I see a lot of heads nodding. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. 7 times 25,000, 175,000. But you forgot about the rule of 72, because it's not going to be 7 times what it is today. It's going to double 7 times. So currently it's at 25,000. If we double it once in 7 years, it's going to be 50,000. If it doubles in another 7 years, it's going to be 100,000. If it doubles again in 7 years, it's going to be 200,000. 28 years, 400,000. 35 years, again, these are increments of 7 years, 800,000. 42 years, 1,600,000. In 49 years, if the Dow goes up at the same level at 10% a year that it has in the past, the Dow Industrial Average would be at 3,200,000. Now contrast that answer, which is based on mathematical calculation, 10% a year. How does that answer of 3.2 million square with the number you kind of came up with in your mind when I asked you, where do you think the Dow will be in 50 years? For the most part, it is so much higher than anybody envisions. You have to ask the question, well, why is that? I just taught you the rule of 72. Well, yeah, you taught it to me. I thought I knew it, but I didn't see the application immediately, or I didn't take time to try to think back about what I knew and apply it to what I'm being asked so I could come up with an answer that reflects the knowledge that I just had or have. Why is that? Well, that became the subject of what Daniel Kahneman, the person I talked about earlier, Hebrew University, turned professor at University of California, and then became the Nobel laureate in 2003 for having changed the way economists think, is why he got that Nobel Prize. Up until he introduced his 30, 40 years worth of research and study and findings of fact, up until he really interjected that into the economic mainstream, economists all made financial decisions based on a realistic model. They assumed that they would gather all of the relevant facts, which is part of making a decision, and then they would weigh those facts based on importance, because not all facts are worthy of equal importance. Some facts are more important than others. So a learned decision maker will balance out the facts and their probability or their importance based on that. But Kahneman came along and said, yeah, but you guys are making a fundamental mistake because you're overlooking one important fact, and that is decisions are made by people. And people have errors in judgment that cause them to think things incorrectly, but they also are human. They have emotions, and those emotions play heavily into their decision-making process. And when Kahneman brought forth that body of work that he and Tversky had been working on for so many years, the economists looked at it and said, this is scientific, this is worthy of taking note of, and they changed their approach to making financial decisions to where today they integrate the reality that decision makers are human beings, and they change the way economists make decisions. Kahneman in his book basically talks about two characters, and they're two characters that reside within the brain. He calls them System 1 and System 2. Those are the two main characters in the book. System 1 is what he calls reflective thinking. I don't know whether you can see that on the screen under System 1, but I'm sorry, not reflective, reflexive. That's the reflexive answer. That's what causes you to know that 2 and 2 is 4. You don't have to think about it, you just know it. It's what causes you to know, for instance, a lot of things. If you're really an expert on a subject, you know things and you don't have to stop and always reflect on it. But you knew what the bat and the ball cost, and you knew that the bat cost $1 more than the ball, but yet you determined the ball cost 10 cents. You were using your System 1. System 1 is automatic. It takes very little effort. In terms of energy that's necessary to make a System 1 decision, it's almost non-existent. That's why we do it. Our system is made in a way that causes us to try to preserve energy. It goes back to our earlier survival instincts. You know, we need to conserve energy because we may have to run from danger, and we want to have energy to do it. System 2, the other character in his book, is the reflective kind of thinking. It's the kind of thinking that requires the use of energy. It takes some mental energy. What's 27 times 38? Well, some of you can do it in your head. Most of us can't. We know how to do it. We know that if we take those two numbers and put them on paper and multiply it, we can come up with the answer. But it's not intuitive. It's not System 1 kind of thinking. It's System 2. It's the kind of thinking that requires slowing down. If you're out for a fast walk with a friend and you're walking along at a brisk pace and you're having a conversation that starts to get energized with some real deep thinking, and a question comes to mind, or you pose a question that requires a thoughtful answer, the first thing that tends to happen is you slow down. You don't walk as fast. You slow down so that you can conserve energy or redirect that energy into the thinking process. And it's the reason why you get tired after you've taken an exam or studied hard. If you're engaging System 2 and thinking about things at a deep level, you can become exhausted very quickly. And again, that's why we tend to want to revert back to System 1, because We don't want to expend energy unless we think it's absolutely necessary. And so many things that we don't think are necessary allow us to rely on System 1, even though we shouldn't. That's not to say System 1 doesn't have a place. We need to be able to make System 1 decisions quickly. It can save our life. But the key is to know when to rely on System 1, when to rely on your instincts, when to react immediately, and when do you need to slow down. And this is Daniel Kahneman. I don't know whether you can see me on the screen, but I've been told I look a lot like him or that we go to the same barber. He's a couple of years older than I am. He's a lot smarter than I am. But I can't have video here, but if this were a video clip instead of just a picture, you'd hear him saying, really, the only thing we have to say to people is just slow down. Just slow down. And that's what thinking fast and slow is about. It's about knowing when to go fast and when to go slow, but knowing enough to be able to go slow when you really need to. This all led up to the book that I have just completed and have published called Spending Your Way to Wealth. It's basically taking Kahneman's basic concepts and trying to distill them down from a 500-page book written by a psychologist to something that can be read even in high school. It's straightforward, it's kind of fun reading. It's got pictures, diagrams, cartoons, things that make a book interesting to read, things that cause somebody to pick it up and say, aha. And that's the purpose of the book, is to try to create kind of those aha moments. Take things that we know for sure that just might not be so. Things that we're told about that may be wrong, or things that we've been led to believe that may not be believable. And again, here I talk about spending your way to wealth, going back to that earlier comment that spending doesn't necessarily involve money and wealth doesn't necessarily involve money. It could be other things. We could have lots of different wealth, going back to the plural. When I wrote the book, I sat down with a piece of paper and I wrote down just 100 things that came to mind that I would like to be wealthy of. And these are an exercise that's really worth doing, because we'd all like to have a wealth of integrity, a wealth of generosity, a wealth of decency, a wealth of originality, a wealth of great friends, a wealth of great memories. Those are important wealths to have in life. We should strive to be wealthy, wealths with a capital or with an S, a plural. We should strive to have a diversified portfolio of wealths, plural. So when somebody says wealth is all about money, and I don't want to talk about money, you don't need to talk about money to talk about the importance of important wealths. You know, I want to go through life and I have that final moment. I want to look back at a wealth of great memories. In fact, I would like my epitaph to read that he died of a massive overdose of great memories. Those are important. Those prompt a lot of spending. I, over the years, have spent a lot of money on things that I want to be able to preserve as memories. Time spent with families growing up, time spent on vacations with families, time spent with my wife on trips. Lots of things that require spending. A lot of time it's just spending time, but often it involves spending money in exchange for something of greater perceived value. A great memory has enormous perceived value to me and to most of us. So this is a book that is not about spending money and about acquiring financial wealth. It's about spending time, energy, reputation, all the things we spend in exchange for things of value. But it has a very heavy emphasis on financial, because that's where Kahneman goes with his book. And he directed his energy into financial decision making. And that's what this book is about. The last part of the book is a free 20-page summary of Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So if somebody doesn't have time or inclination to read 500 pages of a psychology book, buy this book, Spending Your Way to Wealth, and get a free summary written by a real scholar. It's not written by me. It's a wonderfully written short summary of the book, and it's enough to give you all the insights, or most of the insights, that are provided in the book, and it becomes the basis for thinking or spending your way to wealth. Because again, I've tried to incorporate so much of what he talks about. And there's so much that's been learned about the brain in the last decade. It's said that we have learned more about the brain in the last decade than was known about the brain in the period leading up to 10 years ago. Imaging, things that have been discovered that cause people to be able to be more aware of the brain, its function, and how to stimulate certain things, and how to create habits that are retainable and enduring, how to get rid of bad habits. But this is all something that needs to be thought about. The book is about thinking. The 20 years since I retired to finishing this book was spent about thinking, and I became what I defined as being a financial philosopher. Uh, yeah, I thought about financial matters, but I really became very philosophical about how I spent my time, my energy, and my reputation. Uh, One of the most noted people in the financial world, John Bogle, he started and was the chairman of Vanguard Financial, one of the largest financial institutions in the country. And many years ago, he wrote in one of his books that to be financially successful in the investment area, you need to first and foremost be a philosopher. And that stuck with me because philosophers think, and that's what successful financial decision making is about. The book talks about things in different ways. You've probably never heard the term spilling money before, because I've never heard it used before. But as I thought about it, it was a great way to describe spending, because so much spending involves so much spilling. And spilling money is nothing more than just spending more than you need to spend to achieve the same objective or acquire the same thing. We spill enormous amounts of money just so easily, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Uh, but I want to come back to this idea of philosophy a little bit. Now I won't either. In the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead with spilling money. A latte costs $3.50 a day today to get a latte, and a lot of people really love lattes, and they buy maybe a couple a day even. But if a high school kid that's just getting out of high school were to spend $2.70 or $3.50 a day on a latte, over the course of their working career, if you adjust that $3.50 a day for inflation, just 3% a year inflation, by the time they reach retirement age, they will have spent $271,000 on lattes. And what will they have to show for it? Well, they'll showcase a lot of empty cups. They'll probably showcase a lot of memories of drinking a lot of cups of coffee or latte. But if they had just taken the time to think about the real long-term consequences of 370 or 350 a day, the long-term consequences are if they just had plugged that money, that 275 or I'm sorry, 350 a day into an S&P index fund. The book talks about this as being something that can be a core holding for anybody, and in my opinion should be, because the S&P 500 index is made up of index of 500 major companies selected by Standard & Poor to be included in an index. It's been around for years. Over the years, it's averaged, like I said earlier, about 10% a year, but it's become the basis for many, many mutual funds that can assemble those same 500 companies into a holding of funds. And often they are done so at no fees or very, very low fees. Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, some of the major financial firms will offer a no-load index fund with the Standard & Poor 500, and they may range anywhere from 0.2 to 0.5% per year for them to manage it. Peanuts, almost no fee at all. And there's typically no commission associated with that. So again, I say it's something that anybody could, and maybe some people should own a core holding in it. It's not to say it's the ultimate, but it is so good. And if that 350 a day for the latte had gone into an S&P index fund for that same duration of time, it would be worth over $2 million today. Now, spillage can be defined as the forfeiture of wealth too, because that latte didn't cost $3.50 a day. It cost $2 million over time. How about the person that consumes 2 lattes a day? Well, cut back. You don't have to go without the things we like. Buy 1 latte. Take the extra $3.50 that was going to be spent on the second latte and put it in that S&P index fund, so that that's extra $3.50 a day, instead of going into a second latte, becomes worth $2 million. Is that $2 million guaranteed? No, but it's probably quite likely to occur, since that 10% has been an average over so many years. How about lunch? We go to lunch. You know, the average lunch today, the Department of Labor says the average lunch meal out in a restaurant costs $8 a day. You can spend a lot more than that, but that's what they calculate the average restaurant lunch to cost. Well, if you took that $8 a day in 20 years, if you just spent half that amount of money a day, let's say you take your lunch, you probably take your lunch for a lot less than $4 a day, but you could probably find places to eat lunch and grab something for $4 a day. Let's say you just took half of that $8 a day and put it into that same S&P index fund. And you did that, you go to work 22 days a month. So you do that 22 times, 22, you do it 22 times a month. And you spend that $8, half of that. At the time you reach, or in 20 years, not even when you reach a certain age, it's just in 20 years, that S&P index fund will have grown to $74,000. Leave it there and keep doing it for another 10 years. And in 30 years, you're going to have $226,000 in that investment account. This is what doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to money and spending. It's the consequences of spending that matter. How about groceries? As average Americans spend, it's reported between $150 and $300 a week on groceries. Those are average expenses for a family of 4. Well, so let's say you cut back from whatever level you're at. Let's say you're at a medium level of $150 or $200 a week. Cut it back to $150. You could still buy a lot of groceries by trimming $50 from your grocery tab. If you did that, if you took that $50 and you trimmed and you put it in that S&P index fund, in 20 years you'd have $182,000. $182,000. Do it for 30 years and you'll have over $500,000 in that S&P index fund. That's a consequence of spending, the kind of spending we do every day. How about wine with dinner? This strikes home with me because this is really me talking now. My wife and I always enjoyed a glass of wine with dinner. And if you open a bottle of wine, that's worth 2 glasses each. So we would consume a bottle of wine dinner time every day. Well, we didn't always spend $15. Sometimes you spend more than that. Sometimes you spend less than that. But at an average cost of $15 a day, if we stopped drinking wine at dinner period, which we did, we initially said, well, let's just have half a bottle of wine. Well, we said, well, if we're cutting back, what would be the consequence of cutting back completely? So we stopped drinking wine at dinner, and in 10 years, that $15 a day will have grown to $97,000. I view that as my granddaughter's college money for the first year or two. I could even pay for 4 years if she went to some schools. So am I merely cutting back on something that wasn't necessary, but something we said we enjoyed? Well, we haven't stopped enjoying dinner just because we don't have wine with it. And we could have cut back to, a less expensive bottle of wine and taken the difference. And we'd still have a large amount of money in that S&P index fund at the end of 10 years or 20 years. That's what spending is about. And that's an example of what this book is laced with, those kinds of examples. Not only with those kind of examples, but with the methodology of taking any amount of money you want and just being able to very easily calculate what that spillage will amount to over time if it just does what averages have done over time. I talk in the book about Tanya. Tanya's a 27-year-old professional woman. She's been out of school for a number of years. She has a job where she works at home. And she is like most of us. She is occupied with her thoughts as she moves around the house from room to room. And she, like so many of us, leaves a light switch on. And so today, light switches typically control more than one light bulb. But in this case, it's hypothetical. She leaves lights on in her room and leaves, and she actually spends $1.68 a day on electricity to light up empty rooms. Well, that $1.68 a day, if it had gone into an S&P index fund, I'll talk about Kevin here in a minute too, but let me just go back to that. She will have spent $37,000 in wasted electricity by the time she reaches retirement age, just on lighting up a room or rooms that she doesn't need to have electricity on in. $37,000. That's taking electricity at 12 cents a kilowatt, which it is today, figuring out how much a light bulb runs, and $1.68 a day is not uncommon for lights on a room that's not occupied. But $37,000 she's going to spill. That's a lot of money to spill. But if it had gone into an S&P index fund, it's not just a question of not spending it on electricity. It's not spending it on things that you don't need and taking that money you would have spent and spend it differently. You spend it when you put it into an index fund, or you spend it when you buy treasury notes. You spend it when you put money in the bank. Any of those things that fall in the category of savings is really spending. So Tanya will have forfeited $337,000 by having not put that electric money in. I think I misspoke. It's $137,000 that she would have at the time she retired if it had gone into that index fund. Now, Kevin is a character in the book that is really, it's me in disguise. I didn't want to talk about myself in the book, but here I'm talking to neighbors and friends, so I'm going to be honest with you. Kevin is me. In 1978, 40 years ago, I was just 5 years into a financial career, and I needed a new car. I really needed it. My other one has broken down or is not of a quality. I'd just been invited to serve on a board at a bank, and I didn't think I wanted to drive up to a bank board meeting in the car I was. So I needed a new car, and I thought about it. I thought, well, Mercedes builds good cars. I've always liked Mercedes. I've admired them. I went down to the local Mercedes dealer. This is a true story. I lived on Mercer Island. So I went down to Seattle. Phil Smart was a Mercedes dealer. And I said, do you have any used Mercedes diesels? And I'm pretty thrifty by nature, so I wanted a diesel because they get better mileage. The engines last longer. There's fewer moving parts. They're a less expensive vehicle to maintain. And Phil said, yeah, we have one we just took in on trade. It's a really beautiful car. It's only 3 years old. Diesel, has all the things I think you just described you wanted. Let me show it to you. And I went out and I looked at it and I thought, yeah, that's it. Boy, and it was cheaper than a new one. And here's the best part of all for you guys here on Bainbridge. The car had been owned by a minister here on Bainbridge Island. He bought it new from Phil Smart, and he took it there every year for its maintenance. And now I was buying his secondhand car. So I did. I drove it home. I was really proud of it, pulled it into the garage, and I thought, boy, this is great. And I looked at that, and in the back seat of the pocket behind the driver was a brochure for a new one. So I pulled it out and looked at it, and I thought, oh my gosh, they changed the body style. I like this new body style better than this one I just bought. And oh, they have leather in it now. Oh, I'm sitting on plastic. So I took it back to Phil Smart the next day, and I said, if you'll allow me to just reverse that transaction yesterday and apply the money to a new one, I'll buy a new one. How much extra? He said $10,000. So I said, fine. So I gave him a check for $10,000, drove home in the new car. That was 40 years ago. Guess what? If that $40,000 or that $10,000 extra had gone into an index fund, an S&P index fund in 1978, what do you think it would be worth today? Well, I'll tell you, it'd be worth over $450,000. That was what I spilled when I spilled $10,000 extra for a new car. I haven't bought a new car since. I've driven a lot of used cars that are a few years old that I'm just very pleased with. This is a calculator. You'll see at the end here a web page. It's the Investorship web page. The Investorship is a word that Ron and I coined. It's a word that really is a word that describes the highly successful financial decision maker. Warren Buffett has investorship qualities. He thinks differently. He thinks differently in ways that cause him to excel with his financial decision making. But Investorship has become the web page that I operate under, investorship.com. If you go to that web page and you slip on calculator, you bring up this calculator that lets you plug in over on the left side there a dollar amount. You can plug in what it's for if you want. All you have to do is plug in an amount, and then you see the tabs up on the middle there, and that right now it's highlighting daily. You have daily, monthly, weekly, and so on. But there you see, this was $3.65. The right-hand column is the S&P index fund. If that was in there for 50 years, that 385 would grow to $2,200,000. And you can see the each year increment there. Here's the same thing for $50 a week. The weekly tab is clicked. $50 is the amount I plugged in. There you can see what $50 a week grows to over time. You look at 30 years, it'd be over $500,000, just $50 a week. So the key is to not spill it. Don't go without the things you really need, but understand the difference between needs and wants. And why do we spill? Well, we spill because it's so easy. It's made easy every day by the fact that everybody else is doing it. We're just doing what everybody does. And it's because we're normal. It's just normal to just do things. It's only $3.75 a day for that latte. it's just another $12 for lunch. It just seems so small unless and until we have the mental stimulus to go back and consider the long-term consequence. It doesn't have to be long-term in terms of a lifetime. That was only a 10-year consequence for us stop drinking wine at dinner and not spending $15 a day. You know, that's an extra $97,000 I can give to my granddaughter or our granddaughter in 10 years. Uh, what makes us normal? Well, this is something we need to stop and think about. We have biases. If I ask somebody if they're biased, sometimes they'll say no, which is totally wrong. We all have biases. We all frame things. We view things in a certain light that is going to give us an answer maybe that we want. So we frame things, or we allow things to be framed for us that coincide with what we want to have. We have habits that we've formed over time. Why is it that when you get in the car, you drive and you don't really have to think about it? You just know. You have a whole series of individual, almost system one type of thinking, but we just do it automatically. And the reason we develop habits, again, is to save energy. If we can combine a whole lot of individual habits into one big habit, we can save an enormous amount of energy. And if you drive from here to Paulsville, you go to Central Market, think of all the cars you've seen en route. You saw them, you recognize that they were cars, but if you're asked, what kind of cars did you see en route? You have no idea. That's what Kahneman talks about, the difference between our remembering self and our experiencing self. Interesting things to think about when we're contemplating our behavior. What's our temperament? Is it a temperament we like? Is it a temperament that's consistent with what we're trying to achieve? And what are we naturally tending to do? Some things we just do automatically. Sometimes we do it automatically because we've set it up on an automatic payment schedule. But these are things as we sit and contemplate, as we use our philosophical brain to think about why we are who we are. And one of the things that makes us normal is we all just have one brain. Isn't it interesting? We all have one brain, but we all think so differently, and yet we're all normal. And we talk about biases. You know, we think we have a few biases. There's a whole list of biases ending with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have confirmation bias, the top one. That's wanting to find things that coincide with our thinking so that it reinforces our thinking. We frame things. We listen to certain people or we read certain articles that are written by people who are talking about things that we already believe in. Our knowledge is a form of our bias. What we know tends to bias us. Biases can be very, very good. They're not bad. Biases are what cause us to have manners. We behave differently in church than we do, you know, if we're out with a group of friends. But let's look at the list of biases and stop and reflect on them. And then later on, think about your own biases. And what biases do we have that are in the way of our progress, that are causing us to do things automatically that shouldn't be, that are causing us to use system one thinking instead of system two, which is that more deliberative type of thinking. And we spill money when we confuse needs and wants. The book talks a lot about this because the difference between a need and a want is the difference between having a successful financial future and maybe a much less successful financial future. We start at the bottom with our basic physiological needs: food, water, shelter. You know, how long can we go without air? Not very long. We need air. You know, we are so motivated to get air. If we fall in a pool, we fight our way to the surface so we can get air. We can go without food or we go without water for maybe a couple of days. Then our physiological need takes over and we'll do anything for a drink of water. And we'll probably pay any amount for a drink of water. Then we move up on that triangle of needs. That's a pyramid of needs or hierarchy of needs that was developed back in the 40s by a psychologist named Maslow. You'll notice as you go up, the needs become very different. We have a need to belong, that third level up. We need to be in groups. We need friends. Then we need to have esteem. We need to be recognized by our friends as being esteem worthy. We want them to like us. We want them to respect us. And then as we move up to self-actualization, we want to do more than just have friends. We want to do something that has lasting impact, maybe something we'll be remembered by. That's probably where I am in terms of why did I write a book? Well, I had something I thought was worth saying. I'd like for more people to see it. But the thing we do so right at times and yet so wrong at times is we jump around on this pyramid. We're thirsty. The kid comes out of a classroom or we come out of a workplace and we're thirsty and we say, I'm thirsty, I need a Coke. Or I'm done with work, I need a beer. We don't need a beer. We want a beer. We may want a Coke. The kid that wants a Coke because he's thirsty and goes over and puts $1.25 in a credit in a machine to get a Coke, he's quenching a thirst. He's not satisfying a need, he's satisfying a want. He could have gone to the drinking fountain and for nothing, or he could have brought a Coke from home that they put in his backpack that they bought at Costco, cost 25 cents or 30 cents, and he could have put that difference into that spilled difference into an S&P index fund. The key is to take an opportunity to think about what you're spilling and then allocate it into things that don't represent spilled money, things that represent appreciable assets. We have a horrible tendency to overestimate our ability. Call it a grandiosity complex if you want to. You know, we don't want to be average. We don't want to be perceived to be average. When I talk to large groups of people, I get people to close their eyes and then I'll ask them to raise their hand if they think they're a better driver than the other people in the room. And about 70% of the hands go up. Well, isn't that interesting? 70% of the people think they're better than average, but average would be way below that. But we all tend to overestimate our ability, and we want to use that appearance of superiority or grandiosity to have people respect us. And so we misspend some of our grandiosity tendencies in ways that cause us to not achieve the financial success we want. We think about spending and savings as though they're polar opposites. The book points this out because they aren't polar opposites. As long as we think of them that way, then we go out and we spend everything and we don't have anything left over to save. If you think of it in terms of we spend everything, which is true, we really do, unless you give your money away or burn it, you spend it. You spend it when you put it in the bank. You spend it when you buy a U.S. Treasury bond or bill. You spend it when you buy a mutual fund. You spend it when you buy a house. Yeah, it may, what you're really saying is I'm spending it on things that I think will be worth more in the future. Okay, acknowledge that. But instead of thinking, should I spend it or save it? Think about, how do I want to allocate what I'm spending? Because I'm going to spend everything, but I need to spend more on things that are going to be worth more in the future. And that's an important distinction to make, because at the end of the day, if we spend everything on having great memories, and we go to the grocery store when we're retired and we pull up to the cashier, he brings up all the merchandise. He says, that'll be $68, please. And you look at the clerk and say, hey, I've got some great memories that I'd like to exchange. I don't have any money, but I've got great memories. I got a wealth of great memories. And the clerk looks back at it and says, $68, please. Great memories won't buy you things in the future that you may need. So you've got to allocate things in a way that you have that balance. You have a balance of great memories and of sufficient financial future assets to be able to pay the $68 grocery bill or go on enjoying the things in life you want to. Here's another thing that stands in the way of success. Again, this is our ego. This is a graph that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's a very real example of human nature at work. Across the bottom, you see field of knowledge, starting with 0 and going up to very high. You know a lot at the right, you know nothing at the left. If somebody asks you a question at the left, you say, huh? And at the right, somebody asks you a question, you probably have an answer. But look at the vertical axis there, which is confidence. If you go from knowing nothing to own just a little something, your confidence surges and you have this enormous overconfidence because you know something. The thing is, you just don't know enough yet. And as you move up on that, or right on that knowledge-based axis, as you know more and more, and you have greater and greater wisdom, your confidence starts to fall. Isn't that interesting? You know, so sometimes the people with the greatest confidence are the people that know the least. And yet if somebody exhibits a confidence, we tend to think, boy, they must know something because they're so confident. They just absolutely believe what they're saying. But it may be the worst person in the world you can turn to and rely on for anything in the way of knowledge about a subject. And that's just our nature, our egos that tend to get in the way, our egos that cause us to want to be perceived to be very, very knowledgeable based on an extreme amount of confidence that's backed by very little knowledge. This is an interesting graph. This goes back, if you look at the bottom, that far left is the crash of 29. This is the S&P index fund, 500 major companies in the country. And that's what the graph has done. It's gone from 250 on that left axis to 2,900. It's a little over 3,000 today. But that's been a pretty good example of how over time, just owning the major businesses in this country has been a source of enormous wealth. It's been a source of pain from time to time. You can find intervals there where the markets haven't done well, but you can also find intervals of time where it's been an extreme source of pleasure. If you combine those two and you take the top left on the pain box and you go to the top right on the bottom on the right box, you'd have overall pleasure because you've got an ending amount that's higher than the starting amount. But it points out the volatility of stocks, the pleasure that we derive from it. And the thing that we notice there is that fluctuation. One of the keys to being a successful financial decision maker is developing a tolerance for risk, or let's say a tolerance for perceived risk. People perceive there to be risk in the market because there's price volatility. That would be perceived risk as opposed to what constitutes probably real risk, and that is the risk that almost goes away over time because averages tend to revert back to the norm. So part of success is not just being able to recognize the volatility, but being able to tolerate it. And people don't have a natural tendency to tolerate risk, but they can and they should. I'm going to go over that quickly. It depends on whether you look at the graph from the green side or from the red side. If you're looking at the value of a dollar, looking at it the way most people in the audience are looking at it, the value is going down. If you turn your head 90 degrees and look at it the way Johnson over there is looking at it, it's a graph that shows what the S&P index has done over time. You can see the graph, and sometimes graphs can show multiple things. That's what this book is about. It's spending your way to wealth, setting your compass course to steer in the direction of true wealth. This is a picture of the web page. If you go to investorship.com, that word that you've never heard before probably, but now you may remember it. Go to www.investorship.com. Doesn't cost you anything. There's a lot of good information there, including at the top. You'll notice there's some tabs across the top, more about the web page, about the book, the calculator. If you click on the calculator, and then if you click on the book, it'll show you the links to where you can buy the book at Barnes & Noble or Amazon or a local bookstore. And I've got some incentive pricing in place for this book for those of us that fall into the category of being educators. And if you're a grandparent or a parent, you're an educator. So you qualify for this discount. And if you buy 3 books, you can buy 3 books for half price. You can buy any quantity over 3, and they're only $10 each. And it's a perfect gift. And here's the guarantee that goes with the gift. If you will buy 3 or more books, I guarantee you that it will make me very, very happy. Guaranteed. But here's another guarantee. If you buy some extra copies and you give them to people that you admire, you respect, you want to help, you will derive a great deal of satisfaction out of giving them something of real value. I guarantee that too. You're going to feel good about what you've done for somebody when you give them this book. And that's the greatest reward I've had from writing the book, is from people buying a book and calling or writing in saying, hey, they just read it and they loved it and they bought extra copies. I had one person I sent a copy to. He's a financial advisor out of state. He read the book and he called me back. He said, I love the book. I want my clients to read it. I want people that aren't clients to read it. In fact, I want to buy so many of them, I'm going to give them to my school district. And he bought a lot of books, and he's used it both as a thank you to his clients because he felt he was giving them something that was real value. He was giving it to people he wished were clients because he thought it would demonstrate to them some of the ways he thinks. And he wanted to have it in the schools because he wanted kids to have this, because the kids have the great gift of time ahead of them. And the more time a person has, the greater the gift becomes.